I'll be the first to admit, I don't know who the hell Sam Harris is, but I don't want to get to know him. Him and Don Lemon were having a conversation about the Trump administration, and somehow it got on wokeness and identity politics. And basically, this fool comes out his mouth and tells Don Lemon, a black man, that white men are more disadvantaged in this country than anybody else. Y'all, let's get into this video. But first, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Let's get to it, y'all. With over 1 million subscribers, Don got to be careful with who he has on his platform. Let's go ahead and check out this video, you guys.
Do you think that in the definition, the original definition of woke, isn't that what it meant, is to be aware of such inequities and the possibility of, if you elect someone like that, like Don?
But woke was something that was started with black people. We always been saying that. And then it was co-opted by the right.
Donald Trump, then this is what you can expect. So perhaps the people who some call woke, I understand you think it went too far, understood the moment and was aware and awake about what was to come, which is now reality.
Yeah, well, whatever it meant initially, the meaning became indelible in a different sense, right? I mean, just it's now a term of disparagement for everyone who's not, still grasping at the original intended meaning, right? It's just if you don't like woke, I mean, I think the larger footprint, the more generic issue is identity politics, right? I just think we have to get out of the politics of identity. I mean, it's just the thing that was always predictable, but nonetheless surprising, was that if you're going to insist upon the permanent validity and even necessity of identity politics for black and brown people, that was eventually going to produce a counter-reaction, which would be an identity politics for white people, right?
Wasn't that what we're in now? Identity politics for white.
So basically, with you colored folks out there, talking about this race stuff, and putting it out there about your identity and being prideful about who you are, it created a backlash to where there's now white identity. But here's the thing. Who created identity politics? White people. It's so funny because they break it down in these different demographics, which i.e. is identity politics, right? Whether you're a man, woman, your age, race, your sexual orientation, your college education, high school education, all that, your education status, like you guys broke it down into that. So what are you talking about? Everything is identity and there's nothing wrong with that.
White people,
it finally did produce it, and it's as odious as you might have expected.
But wait, hold on. You think that is that's what started white identity politics? Isn't white identity politics the whole reason that we're here now, that we came from a white identity is slavery and
well, so there's a long history of racism in this country, obviously, but I'm talking about people right of center who were not racists, so are not even, it might even be true to say of them that they're not racist in certainly the old sense of racism that is worth caring about. They're not white supremacists. They're not people who, were frequenting the Stormfront website or any. They're just not those sorts of people. They might have even voted for Obama the first time around, or even the second time around. But they got.
And you'll hear a lot of them say, "I can't be racist. I voted for Obama." That doesn't absolve you from racism, by the way, but hey.
Got pushed rightward by this endless culture of grievance and victimology and the endless aspersions of racism. It's not just racism. Obviously, the trans issue was a very big lever that got pulled and mattered. But all of this, the intersectional set of concerns around identity that completely subsume the politics of the left, such that in the year 2020 or 2021 or so, we achieved something like a moral panic around this, and such that when Kamala Harris, in those 100 days where she was trying to become president, had to revisit some of the positions she took in 2020 or maybe it was 2019, she just, I mean, there was no way to utter coherent sentences so as to take the stink off of them. I mean, she was singularly bad at doing this. I mean, I think it was possible to have done that, but she and her handlers couldn't figure out how to get her to disavow her prior support for taxpayer-funded gender reassignment surgery for incarcerated.
See, and this is where he comes with that bullshit, because that's a lie. That policy was actually started during the Trump administration. And mind you, now that we're in 2026, they still have not changed that ruling. And it's not just sex changes. By the way, there's only been one sex change for a prisoner, right? It's actually for gender affirming care. That's what it's actually for. And then, of course, sexual reassignment surgery is a part of that. But essentially, that law was not started by Kamala Harris. First of all, she wasn't the president. Let's start with, simple civics right there. But secondly, that was started underneath Trump. So again, that was something that they weaponized and used against her. And I don't know if he's going to mention defund the police, but again, she never said defund the police. She said reimagining the police back in 2019, 2020.
Illegal immigrants, right? But that was the SNL sketch wrapped in an Onion article. That
you realize, that was a Trump policy, though, right? That policy was enacted under Donald Trump.
I didn't know that, but and the fact that I didn't is just yet another measure of how successful the sliming of her was. But crucially, when she was asked this question point blank in an interview, she couldn't say. I mean, she was doing a tightrope walk, an intersectional tightrope walk that could not be accomplished, right? Which is what was necessary was for her to say, "Listen, a lot happened back there in 2019, 2020." And there were many policies that were not thought through fully. And I'm happy to talk about the trans issue or Black Lives Matter or anything else you want to talk about. But yes, if you're going to ask me if I would be for that policy now, no, I wouldn't be. Right? And people, I mean, people can understand how a person's position changes as long as there's some rational accounting of how they got from there to here.
But her campaign was never about that. Her campaign was not about Black Lives Matter. It wasn't about trans people. It wasn't about identity politics. Her identity was weaponized against her, again, just like I said earlier. And there would be questions about, oh, Trump said this, like you were Indian, you weren't Black, and this and that. And she literally would just be like, that's another racist trope that he's using. She wouldn't even divulge or go deeper into that because, again, they wanted her to react in a certain way so they could use it against her. So him trying to say this is just bullshit. Honestly, what it is when they bring up the whole identity politics, white people don't want to feel guilty for what their ancestors did. That's what it is.
But if you're still living in a quasi-religious circumstance of blasphemy tests and things that simply can't be said, it makes politics impossible. So I just think we need a hard reset in the Democratic Party around so-called wokeness or identity politics, or what I would call like a social justice moral panic that we experienced about 5 years ago at its peak.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. So let's just say that I don't necessarily agree with everything you said. So let's just say that you're correct.
Okay.
And you said between 2019 and 2020 and whatever which was sort of the peak. Now just think about the entire history of this country, and then you have a sort of rejiggering, right, recalculating, where people are trying to figure out how to even things out. And let's say that goes on for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Do you think that is, you think that it is okay, or it is fair to say that within those couple of years that you need to reshape politics because of something which was possibly a wanting of the leveling of the playing field to play out? you think that that is a fair analysis or a fair assessment considering the history of the country, starting with how the country was started with taking the land away from Indian Americans or Native Americans, and then on with slavery, and you have hundreds of years now of that, and then within 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that all of a sudden we need to reshape our politics because people are asking for folks to understand what it is like to be a minority in this country, whether it is transgender or Black or even Jewish. Do you think that that is a fair assessment of, do you think that's fair?
Well, I mean, fairness is the
or even
crucial-
logical, or even logical.
Well, but I mean, so you're using words like fair and logical, and I mean, I think these are really, we're right to care about these principles, really at the foundation level of our thinking about anything, right? So, if you're going to track fairness and logicality, then I think you're never going to have a problem. But what was so egregious about this, about identity politics, and remains so, is that fairness and logicality were the first things to go out the window, right? I mean, if you want to level the playing field, it matters that you do it in a way that is fair and logical, right? So like, and not simply perpetrating the opposite harms that that have caused you
That's in an ideal world.
It's like this whole, what he's trying to say is basically like, oh, if you make it fair for people of color, then it ends up reversing and suppressing white people. There's no actual factual statistic that shows that any like, for example, the Equal Employment Opportunity Act or affirmative action or any of the DEI, any of these programs hurt white people to where they're more oppressed. It's never been that way.
Oh, Sam, you understand what I'm saying. You're talking about something that's in an ideal world. Our world is not ideal. And the reason that we got to this moment is because of the playing of white identity politics. MAGA is the biggest identity political movement, I think, in history. And they like to call out others by saying this is identity politics, that you're playing identity politics, when they are the ones. Every accusation is a confession. MAGA, look at what's happening right now. Even what you're complaining about, the situation that we're in, that's because of identity politics. It's because of white identity politics.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's awful. I mean,
but I don't believe that a white identity politics necessarily those politics were spurred from something that happened between 2019 and 20 whatever you want to call it. I think that happened over the history of the country.
I can just tell you
long arc of history.
The two extremes amplify each other, right? I mean, so the far left and the far right are gifts to one another, right? I mean, they radicalize
100%. 100%.
And what we need is a vast center to our politics where people are sane and logical and fair and intellectually honest. And so yeah, I think a lot of the stuff around.
I think a better way of putting it is where is so you have this urgency within the last 5 or 6 years. Where was that urgency over the last centuries, decades, centuries?
There was an appropriate urgency in around civil rights in 1964, right? That was absolutely appropriate to that moment, and a resetting of policy of a sort that may have been perfect then, but didn't age so well. So I mean, look at something like affirmative action, right, or DEI at the level of policy, like for application to college or medical school, right? What was appropriate in the 60s and 70s and 80s, right, might not have been appropriate 5 years ago. And I think.
Now, here's the thing. What they don't talk about with DEI, affirmative action, and all of that, the biggest beneficiaries are white women, especially DEI. They make up 60% of the beneficiaries from that. So again, the problem is that people of color are not benefiting from those programs as much as their white counterparts. That's the actual problem. But instead, he wants to blame the black folks, people of color, and everybody else. Like, oh well, you don't need it anymore. And just because it says in the rules that oh you need to be more fair or hit certain numbers and stuff like that, doesn't mean that people go like, oh well, you know what, we need to hire more black people. It never works out that way.
That's true when you look at the actual real world outcomes, right? So 5 years ago, or even 10 years ago, honestly, even 20 years ago, if you ask yourself, if you look at the full landscape of high status jobs and opportunities in our society, right? Jobs in academia or media or philanthropic organizations. I mean, just like if you want a job at Netflix or you want a job at the Ford Foundation or Microsoft or et cetera, what did being black do for you in the application process? If you look at people of equal talent, equal training, and you just know that one is black and one is white, one is a white man and one is a black woman, right? Where were the advantages? Right now, there was a story from the Democrats that never got revised from 1964 on. I mean, Joe Biden, one of his first speeches as president was to a black college. I forget which college it was. Might have been Howard. Anyway, you could look it up. But he gave a commencement speech to a group of black college graduates. And this speech could have been written in 1966, right? I mean, he was saying things like, "You're going to have to be 200% better than the white guy to get your foot in the door," right? Everyone knew, right, and has.
That's true. That's correct. That's not a lie.
known for many years that when you're talking about any high status job in this country, getting into Harvard Medical School, etc., that is a lie, right? That has been a lie for a very long time. In fact, the opposite is true. No one was more disadvantaged based purely on the superficial characteristics of skin color than white men for a very long time getting into high status. Now, I'm not saying racism doesn't exist. I'm not saying there are no disadvantages to black men.
You don't believe that, do you?
Oh, it's obviously
look
true.
At the numbers. The numbers don't bear that out. That's not true.
The numbers
Sam,
of those
I operate in a circle of a lot of white people who attend Ivy League schools, and a lot of the folks their kids are attending these schools have endowment. They give money to the schools. They put libraries in the schools. They are
legacy is also another corrupt.
Legacy hurts more than affirmative action ever will. And what's funny about that is like they try to use the Asians against black people with affirmative action. But the thing is that admissions have been mixed when it comes to Asian students after they got rid of affirmative action. Like some schools have seen a slight increase, but also some schools have seen a decrease. So you'll have, for example, Harvard, they've seen an increase. With Yale, they actually had a decrease in admissions from Asian students. So again, it's a mixed bag. It's not the black people or the brown people that was keeping Asians from getting into those schools. It was actually the white people with the legacies, the donors. Those are the ones keeping them from the school. And let's not forget, at the end of the day, those predominantly white institutions, they still have a preference for the white students. So either way, it had nothing to do with us. And again, that just proves that white people aren't disadvantaged.
And the system, yeah.
And I barely, if ever, see a black person among them. Rarely.
Okay, no,
and if you look at the numbers, the numbers are not there. Look at the representation of white men and black women in every type of business, leaders of companies.
CEO. We have to be systematic. We have to be systematic, in how we talk about this, Don, because the facts are there for anyone to find. In terms of, if you're going to ask yourself, like internships at the New York Times, who has gotten those internships, right? The first rung on the ladder in recent years. and you look at the percentages that go to white men
It's
versus
all white kids who have
not
parents
true.
who.
It's absolutely not
Sam,
true.
it is. I work in the media business.
Okay, well,
it is true.
There has been research
Almost
done on
every
this. Okay,
single person
there's
is someone
been
who
research
comes from a
published
legacy,
on
or
this recently.
someone who
John,
can pick up the phone and call someone and say, my daughter or my son or my nephew is looking for an internship.
Yes,
and it's usually the people that they know, and those are white kids.
You're talking about the influence of nepotism. You're talking in colleges. You just mentioned the influence of legacy admissions. All of that is true. That has not overwhelmed this other countervailing set of policies.
Well, if that's true, why aren't you out there trying to get rid of that? You know, if nepotism is the real issue, why don't you try to get rid of nepotism? You know, these legacies and, you know, stuff like that. Like, you should be just as passionate about that as you are about affirmative action.
That we could go by the name of affirmative action or DEI.
When you talk about, are you sure you're talking, when you talk about
DEI,
DEI, because diversity, equity, inclusion, you know, the number one beneficiary of diversity, equity, inclusion is white women. And I think white men may be number two. But because diversity, equity, and inclusion is not affirmative action, those are not the same thing.
No, I know they're not the same thing, but there's an overlapping set of concerns here that
diversity, equity, and inclusion is casting a wider net of people who are qualified for whatever it is. Affirmative action is more about numbers. DEI is,
and I'm glad that he said people who are qualified, because again, they think that I can just walk in and be a heart surgeon. I never went to school to be a heart surgeon. No, I can't be a heart surgeon, you know?
It's about let's get as many qualified people in the pool than we can.
Affirmative action is more about quotas, and when misapplied, I mean, this was the famous lawsuit against Harvard, launched by Asian students, right? Which was, I mean, this is something that was objectively true, that Asian students were being discriminated against by Harvard, right? I mean, they just, if they weren't discriminated against, they would, based on their numbers and based on their cultural values and the level at which they were preparing for college, they were going to swamp the admissions of Harvard University, as they have in many other universities. And Harvard had a policy to select against them, and it was a racist policy, right? So my point is not that we shouldn't value diversity. My point is we have to be alert to the problem of perverse incentives. We have to care about alleviating the real inequalities that still exist with remedies that actually work, right? So if you care about poverty, if you care about inequality in all its forms, educational inequality, the inequality of health outcomes, right? Well, then you should be targeting those in a way that is sane and not injurious to our politics. I mean, so for instance, during COVID, we had a policy where businesses were going to be helped, not preferentially based on the color of the skin of the people who were the business owners, right?
Let me just say this, Sam, because I'm looking it up now. So this thing that you're talking about with Harvard,
I don't know what he's talking about. Like, businesses were, yeah, he's making that. And again, it's like these anecdotal things, and like people are just going based off of what they heard on the internet. This is basically what he's saying, because I don't remember that at all during COVID. And it's not a specific policy like, oh, we're just giving money to Black business. Like, what? Everybody got a PPP loan.
They ruled that Harvard did not intentionally discriminate against Asian American applicants, upholding their holistic admission process. While plaintiffs argued that lower personal ratings for Asian Americans indicated bias, courts found no evidence of unlawful discrimination or animus. And then again, another article says the decision did not disturb a lower court decision, because they appealed it, a lower court decision that Harvard had not illegally discriminated against.
Yeah, it was not illegal. I mean, it was ruled that it was not illegal, but it was injurious because the ground truth exposed in that lawsuit was that for an Asian applicant to have the equivalent chance of getting into Harvard as a Black applicant, all things being equal, they had to have a 400-point higher score on the SAT, right? So it's just, Like when facts like that come tumbling out of a lawsuit of that sort,
well, if you're saying that there's an Asian student and a black student and they have the same score, then what's to say that they didn't pick the black student because maybe they had, some extracurricular activity or they were in sports or something like that compared to the Asian student,
Whatever the outcome of the
I don't
lawsuit,
know if that's a fact. You had to have a 400%, but go on.
No, 400 points. Yeah.
400 points. Yeah.
It's just, listen, you could practice affirmative action in a way that bypass that specific concern totally. You could simply, rather than lower the requirements to get into Harvard, you could just preferentially find.
I'm going to go ahead and stop it right here. The reason why I was laughing is because this conversation was supposed to be about Trump and how Republicans don't hold him accountable. And, the question about, is there anything that Republicans can do that they'll turn on Trump or say like, no, this is wrong or this is bad. And this is how initially it was supposed to start out. And then it got into this whole, Sam had said something about like, yeah, well, because identity politics, it had this whole backlash, and this is why white people feel the way they do and all that. So this is how the conversation went left. And me being a YouTuber and having guests on my show, like it'll start out one way and then they'll throw a curveball and we're talking about something way different. And you're just all like, how did we get here? I am so pissed off. And I know Don was like pissed. Eventually they end up changing the subject back to what it originally was supposed to be about. But yeah, this threw Don's whole show off. But again, great entertainment. And I'm happy that Don did have him on the show, even though I said earlier, like, Don, you got to be careful with who you have on your show. Because again, Don got to debunk a lot of the BS he was saying. Because again, a lot of these people will go in their little comfort zones and in their little circles, and they might be some fans of Sam Harris, even though I never heard of him, might be some fans of him and being like, yeah, he's speaking the truth. He's being real, blah, blah, blah. And it's all like, no, he's not. He has never been challenged, so you don't know better, right? But anyway, you guys, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell and press all. Also, thank you guys for all the Cash App, PayPal, Venmos that you guys send me. I know when I don't do a live show, sometimes I still get notifications that you guys did donate and support the show. So I appreciate that. I love y'all for watching, but we out of here. Deuces, everybody.